For any reason, I hate that you leave when the lights come on. And if I had it my way, the fucking sun would be gone.
Walls keep spinning and my path keeps turning. Patience spinning and my calves keep burning. Hotter than the furnace, suddenly I'm learning. Maybe I finally reached the point of no returning. East is north and west is south. I feel like I'ma never get out. I'm trapped.
Why don't you sit right down and stay a while? We like the same things.
Not believe because I'd go berserk? Well, you left me anyhow, and then the days got worse and worse, and now you see I've gone completely out of my mind. And they're coming to take me away, haha, they're coming to take me away, oh yeah, the bloody farm, where life is beautiful all the time. And
Is it cold outside? Is it cold outside?
In which your life never matters. So who cares if it's a waste? Well, one day you'll be not even a same memory. No, it must have got to finally from your family tree. Your legacy's not yours to see, nor is your unity. And you'll never know what it all means.
Everybody hates me. Yes, I
in the bed, kitchen counter, or stairs. Wherever you want it, baby, I'm taking you there. The way you walk in them hills, beyond sex appeal, beyond any type of feeling you get from taking a pill. I don't care if they real, could care less if they fake. I like the way that you moving, the way you making it shake. Casually date ball players that bore you to death. Feel like I'm digging for oil, you feel it up in your chest. Love the way that you dressing, God bless you, girl. Now go and show your sexy ass to the rest of the world.
Mary, my God, you're divine. Give me them dope and diamonds. I knew, baby, New York City. Knows there a girl so pretty. Do you think we'll be in love forever? Do you
Hey girls, I'm the best fighter in the world and the best looking guy in magic. Who wants to be my girlfriend?
And you just fell at his feet. Actually, he fell at my feet.
They like the way I grind. They like the way I flirt. They like the way my new meat is speaking on my skirt.
последний раз? Время пройдет, и ты забудешь все, что было. С тобой у нас. С тобой у нас. Нет, я не жду тебя, но знай, что я любила. Последний раз. Последний раз.
There are times when I will
Is she divine? Is it the wine? Listen, listen, listen. I don't know, so don't ask me why. That's how we are. Listen, but when he loves me, I feel like I'm burning. When he calls me pretty, I feel like somebody.
Cause it's kinda pretty. I can't stop looking at her face. Me and Cat Mama rolled into the distant fall. Little did you know I'm a nasty dog.
tell them what you told me. Don't even tell them that you know me. I would rather hurt forever. You should know that I died so, cutting through the walls of your haunted home. The toughest part is that we both know what happened to you while you're out on your own. Merry Christmas, please don't go. Merry Christmas, I'm not yours at all. Merry Christmas, please don't go.
Wise man closes his mouth, madman closes his fist. Young man shows his age, judgment and sin. I bet I'm bad man don't exist. No evil man exists. Good man don't exist. No righteous man exists. I bet I'm sad man cannot cry in place where man can see. Never witnessed Father weep. The sword man thought it weak. I bet I'm strong man don't exist. Dying man exists. Weak man don't exist. Just flesh and blood.
Pero si mi boca se equivoca y al llamarla nombro a otra, a veces siente compasión por este loco, ciego y loco corazón. Sea lo que quiera Dios que sea, mi delito es la torpeza de ignorar que quien no tiene corazón y va quemándome y me quema. No. Y si fuera ella,
So that is all for the moment. Until next time. Until then, do not worry. And give me just one more chance. One more glance and I will make of you. Yeah, I'm gonna make of you. Another believer. You've been on my mind. Though it may seem I'm fooling, wasting so much time. Though it may seem I'm fooling.
When you get big, get quick, wanna spend shit, and meant for a hunger injection. I can't handle rejection, damn the reflection, damn the audacity. Should I be kind or reminded of weak?
I read your diary every line. I wanna drink your words like wine. I read your diary every line. I wanna drink your words like wine.
As is on a tirade. Make your pop a Tylenol, split your head and call it off. Got you drinking water when you should be drinking alcohol. Faster than an Adderall. Make it shake your Audemars. Shake it, shake it, shake it, make it spread like an aerosol.
Just like seeing her for the first time again. It's just like seeing her. Lately you've been acting like you baby, call me home.
Your life is on contract. Your best bet is to stay away, motherfucker. It's just one of those days. It's all about the he said, she said bullshit. I think you better quit, let the shit slip, or you'll be leaving with a fat lip. It's all about the he said, she said.
Get a load of this train wreck. His hair's a mess and he doesn't know who he is yet. But little do we know the stars welcome him with open. Get a load of this monster. He doesn't know how to communicate. His mind is in a different place. Will everybody please give him a little bit of space?
Don't know fuck about my family. Could never tell you what happened the day I turned 17. I don't relate to you. I don't relate to you, no. 'Cause I'd never treat me this shitty. You made me hate this city. And I don't talk shit about you on the internet. Never told anyone anything bad. 'Cause that shit's embarrassing. You are not everything. All that you things make me fucking sad. So don't waste the time. Can't you see yourself by my side? I don't suppose you could convince your lover to change his mind. I was doing fine without you till I saw your face. Now I can erase getting into all this bullshit. Is this what you want? Is this who you are?
It really hurts when I need to so bad, but I can't see her. A Juliet, my special girl.
Todas viciadas em cinta, pedindo pix pros cara que é bigode. Hoje em dia é difícil encontrar uma menina que não trabalha no job. Todas viciadas em cinta, pedindo pix pros cara que é bigode. My dread like some bull type shit. Cook a nigga up like food type shit. Push up for my dogs, dirty dirty type shit. She put it all on my bounce, I got the moon type shit. Those days for my flaws, I had that new type shit. When I jump with the best, I got a new type shit. All of my jeans to say I think I'm over type shit.
Too young to be living like this. Ask me why I do it, I'ma put it like this. God damn it, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. God damn it, I love it.
Her pistol go. Her pistol go. I said her pistol go. Cause she a fashion killer and I'm a trendy nigga. I said her pistol go.
She's posing out front. She's spilling cons. She's more than proud. Nobody could have running down the house to top. Everybody waiting for a single to drop. Look at her when they wanna see what's happening. Heels go, but her legs still.
She call me daddy, but I ain't her motherfucking father. Wrist so icy, wonder why she like me, bitch. I'm drowning in water. I just bought a cube and dipped it in a fountain. Everywhere that I go, it's a light show. I'm surrounded. Bust down, bust down, bust down, bust down, bust down, bitch. I'm drowning. I just bought a cube and
what you really like. Baby, I can take my time. We don't ever have to fight. Just take it step by step. I can see it in your eyes, 'cause they never tell me lies. I can feel that body shake and the heat between your legs. You've been scared of love.
Tan dentro de mí, te sigo pensando, te sigo esperando, y estás tan lejos de mí. Te sigo pensando, me canso llorando. Little Andy, soft in your newborn skin, only one little Andy. Will you return again? I believe we can renew, and you could be my brother once again. Fall asleep with our backs against each other.
Hello, Christine. Would you be my prom queen?
I'm just a toy to you. Say no car.
Who do you think you are? You were sucking dick for a foreign car. Gotta take that call. They want you at work, so girl, go do your job.
You ain't got
gotta tell me. It's just in my nature, so take it like a taker. So baby, I'll get mine. Ain't no need to hurry. So baby, I deliver. Ain't no country boy quitter. I get the job done.
Sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from a stranger in the night, but from the person sitting quietly beside you. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect fresh start. A man rebuilding his life after heartbreak, finally finding love and creating the future he'd always dreamed of. But beneath that hopeful story, something else was stirring. An obsession that would turn into something far deadlier. This isn't just a story about love found and lost. It's about how easily trust can disguise a predator, and how one man's desperate attempt to possess another would end in a plot twist too disturbing to imagine. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder, all things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded. I woke Rupert up. Rupert's sitting in the background if you're just listening to this. And I made him upset. Are you okay? It's okay. I thought I'd bring Detective Rupee back. He was peeing for a while there. He was peeing in his bed. Oh, in his kennel. He's embarrassed now. I embarrassed him. But he's back. He's been better now. So today we are talking about a crazy case I was reading into, and I'm not going to give too much away, but it is quite the plot twist at the end. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this plot twist case together. Eugene, or Jean Thurneau II, was by all accounts a man of warmth, dedication, and resilience. Born in Kansas City, Missouri, Jean grew up with solid Midwestern roots and later served his country as a member of the U.S. Air Force. And after a successful stint in the Air Force, he transitioned into a career as an air traffic controller. Very stressful job. My grandpa used to do it for like 30 years. Hats off to the people in air traffic control if you're listening to this by chance. But this is where his natural charisma quickly made him popular among colleagues. And at the Columbus Municipal Airport in Nebraska, one of his early postings, Jean's friendly, outgoing nature stood out. And he was described as extroverted and friendly, always ready to strike up a conversation. The opposite of me. Just kidding, I'll talk to anybody, really. It'll just kind of segue into a conversation of just deep-rooted trauma, and we trauma bond, and it just goes south really fast. But anyway, Jean was the kind of guy that had an easy smile and a kind word for everyone he met. And outside of work, he led a humble life, doting on his 3 pet dachshunds that he affectionately considered his family. Rupert, you hear that? Rupert's a dachshund, by the way. Rupert, you're a dachshund. Aww. But those who knew Jean paint a picture of a good-looking man who was trim, personable, and full of hope for the future. And he had a big heart and an optimistic outlook, which drew people into him. Yet behind Jean's warm demeanor lay the scars of past hurt. Because by his mid-40s, Jean had already weathered a devastating personal heartbreak. He had actually been married for 20 years to his first wife, a relationship that had tested the limits of his devotion. Because when his wife fell gravely ill, Jean became her steadfast caretaker, nursing her through a life-threatening illness over a period of years. I can't even imagine. It's just like the most selfless, caring person ever, and to have that happen to your partner, it's just devastating. But he put everything on hold to ensure that she survived, demonstrating a depth of loyalty and compassion that speaks to his character. However, once she recovered her health, Jean's world was upended. And in a cruel twist, she told him she didn't want to be with him anymore, and she was leaving him for an old flame from her past. Like, what a blow to spend years and years taking care of your partner, all for them to get better and turn around and just leave you. I mean, obviously he deserves better, but oh man, it's so sad. It is so incredibly sad. So this revelation shattered Jean, obviously. And after years of pouring his love and energy into saving her life, he was rewarded not with gratitude, but with abandonment. And this betrayal left him heartbroken and just reeling, struggling to make sense of how everything had fallen apart. So struggling from the end of his 2-decade marriage, Jean did what many do after traumatic loss, and he just sought a fresh start. And in the aftermath of the divorce, work became Jean's refuge. He just poured himself into work. So he threw himself into his duties at the Nebraska Control Tower, logging long hours to occupy his mind. And despite his personal turmoil, Gene remained good at his job, calm under pressure, meticulous, and well-liked by his team. And not to mention, for air traffic control, it is quite literally one of the most stressful jobs in the world, like on top of being a doctor and like a police officer and everything. You need a level head beyond a level head. So for him to have all of that devastation happen to him, and then just to go back to work and be super cool headed is just says a lot about him. But even keeping a cool head at work, a lot of those close to him could see the pain he carried beneath his friendly exterior. The wounds from his wife's betrayal ran deep, and reminders of his old wife were everywhere in Nebraska. So he knew he needed a change of scenery to truly move on. So in 2002, Gene made a pivotal decision, and he requested a transfer to Florida, where many of his immediate family, including his parents and siblings, had relocated. And he believed that being closer to family would help him heal, which, yeah, I mean, I'd do the same thing. So Florida just represented hope to Gene, a warm, sunny new beginning far away from the ghosts of his past. So when he announced his transfer plans at work, his colleagues were very supportive, knowing how much he'd been through, and they could understand his desire to start anew. But one coworker in particular, however, took the news harder than the rest. And this person was a quiet man who worked in the next cubicle, who seemed oddly emotional when Gene broke the news. And at the time, Gene interpreted the tears welling in his coworker's eyes as simple sadness at losing a colleague and a friend. And he didn't think much more after that. So the move was not just about escaping bad memories, it was about finding himself again. And in the wake of his divorce, Gene hadn't given up on the idea of love altogether. Deep down, he still hoped that one day he might meet someone new and rebuild the happy life that had been taken from him. So as he prepared for Florida, he dared to imagine a brighter future. So at 47 years old, Gene was determined that his story wasn't over, and he would make Florida the setting of his next chapter, one filled with family, friendship, and maybe even new love. So in early 2003, Gene's new chapter began in earnest, and he arrived in the Tampa Bay area of Florida to take up his post at the St. Petersburg Clearwater International Airport, a mid-sized airport where he would work as an air traffic controller. So as he settled into his new environment, he felt a cautious optimism, and the subtropical warmth embraced him, and knowing his family was only a short drive away gave him some sort of comfort. Because at the end of the day, this was a second chance, a new lease on life. It was a chance to rebuild his life from the ground up. And Gene's reputation as a skilled controller and a friendly presence quickly followed him to Florida. And his natural charm won over his new colleagues almost immediately. So it wasn't long before he felt a home in the new facility. So surrounded by loved ones, Gene started to regain the confidence and happiness he had lost. So Gene was in a good place in life, finally. And luckily, Florida didn't just bring Gene closer to his blood relatives. It also led him straight to the woman who would capture his heart. And not long after transferring to the new airport, Gene met Juanita, or JJ, Formoso. And JJ was a vivacious 48-year-old air traffic controller who worked alongside him. And JJ was a Florida native and a mother, known among coworkers as a confident, skilled professional who could handle the high-pressure environment of the control room with ease. And like Gene, JJ had her own painful history, because she was also going through a difficult divorce after about 20 years of marriage herself. So perhaps it was this shared experience of heartbreak that drew them together. Or maybe it was simply their natural chemistry. But in any case, sparks flew from the moment JJ and Gene met. And JJ certainly noticed Gene early on. And by all accounts, she was quite taken with him. The handsome new guy with a ready smile and kind eyes. At first, their interactions were the friendly, professional kind, and then Gene, still cautious from his previous hurt, took things slowly, just like the ultimate gentleman. He wasn't really the type to rush into another relationship, especially at work. But as weeks turned into months, the connection between Gene and JJ deepened, and they'd chat about work, then about life outside of work. Coffee dates became a regular thing, a highlight of both their days. But Gene and JJ kept it discreet. And for 2 whole years, they quietly nurtured their budding romance in private. not wanting to complicate their jobs with personal drama. Just the utmost professionalism. But it would be Jean who would finally muster the courage to take it to the next step. And one evening, after 2 happy years of dating under the radar, Jean proposed marriage to JJ. And by then, he knew without a doubt that she was the partner he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. And her answer was an enthusiastic yes. And when the couple shared the news of their engagement at work, the control room erupted in spontaneous applause, and their coworkers were genuinely happy for them, having sensed that there was something special between Jean and JJ. Your coworkers always know. They always know the tea, what's going on. And Jean just simply felt grateful to have the support of his colleagues as he and JJ embarked on a new journey together. So with the wedding on the horizon and their love solidified, Jean and JJ decided it was time to lay down roots in a place that they could call their own. And even before they officially tied the knot, the couple agreed that they wanted to build a home together, literally from the ground up. And they dreamed of a place tailored to their tastes, where they could start fresh and leave past sorrows behind. So wasting no time, they pooled their resources and purchased a spacious lot in an upscale gated community in Land O'Lakes, Florida, about 15 miles from North Tampa. And the neighborhood was quiet, secure, and picturesque, the perfect setting for the future. And soon, architects and contractors had blueprints drawn up, and construction on their custom dream home commenced. And before the house was completed, Jean and JJ made their commitment official, and they engaged vows in a small, intimate wedding ceremony attended only by family and their closest friends. And Jean's face was full of happiness as he watched JJ walk down the aisle, because after everything that he had endured, here was finally a moment of pure joy. So as the months rolled on, construction on their home neared completion. But little did they know that someone else had been imagining that life as well, watching their dream home rise brick by brick with very different emotions. But for now, Jean and JJ were simply happy, looking forward to settling into married life. And they had no inkling that their happily ever after was already under quiet threat from the shadows of obsession lurking in the background. So back when Jean was in Nebraska, there was another air traffic controller by the name of Robert Dean, or Bob Peterson. And Bob was the same age as Jean. Both men were in their late 40s at the time. But aside from that coincidence, he seemed at first glance to be Jean's polar opposite. Physically, Bob Peterson was overweight and balding, with a rounded build and unassuming presence. Where Jean was fit and traditionally handsome, Bob had the look of a middle-aged man who perhaps spent more time with stamps and books than at the gym. And I say that because Bob enjoyed stamp collecting as a hobby. Not saying that all people that collect stamps look like Bob, I'm just saying that he literally collected stamps. And socially, the two could not have been more different. Jean, as we know, was chatty and outgoing, while Bob was quiet, introverted, and somewhat reclusive. So in the bustle of the control tower, Bob tended to keep his head down and focus strictly on work. And he wasn't disliked by any means, and colleagues found him polite and competent, but he just didn't mingle much. He was basically the kind of person who could fade into the background really easily, the definition of a wallflower. He was said to be called Boring Bob by some colleagues, that's rough. But this was due to his mild and unremarkable demeanor. But despite being well-educated, he lacked the easy confidence that Jean exuded. So Bob largely kept to himself, offering only a few words here and there beyond necessary job-related talk. And the tower staff accepted Bob as he was, a harmless, unobtrusive presence who did his job and then went home. And that was that. So if anything, a few coworkers felt a bit sorry for Bob. He didn't fit in easily, and he was solitary by nature, but still, people knew very little about his personal life, as he rarely volunteered information about himself. Because Bob didn't share stories or jokes the way Jean did. And if he smiled, it was unusually in response to something Jean said, as if Bob looked to Jean for cues on how to act, in like a psychopathic way. When you see in movies when psychopaths are practicing how to smile and use emotions in the mirror, that's how I picture Bob was. So in many ways, Bob was an enigma to his colleagues, a seemingly ordinary, even dull man whose inner thoughts remained largely closed off to those around him. And it might have stayed that way with Jean, the sociable star, and Bob, the quiet loner, if not for Jean's own kindness and natural friendliness. Because Jean and Bob actually had cubicles right next to each other, and noticing that Bob was often alone, Gene made a point to befriend him because that's just the kind of guy Gene was. He was just a very sweet man. And he would invite Bob into casual conversations, ask him how his day was going, and share little bits about his own life to make Bob feel included. And Bob, who often seemed hesitant to initiate anything, responded eagerly when Gene extended a hand of friendship. And soon, Bob began talking more, but mostly just to Gene. So it was as if Bob latched onto Gene as his one true friend in the workplace, the person he felt most comfortable around. And Gene didn't mind at all. He was happy to have a friendly rapport with a man that worked right next to him in the office. So one afternoon, Gene was showing off a few photos to colleagues, snapshots of his 3 beloved dachshunds at home, because his little dogs were like kids, which I totally get. And Bob would peer over at the pictures with interest. And when Gene proudly declared the breed, Bob responded with enthusiasm, "Oh, I love that breed." And Gene was pleased, thinking they'd found common ground as dog lovers. But in reality, Bob had no pets at all at the time. But Bob's eagerness to please Gene was such that he'd say anything to make a connection. And in a bizarre turn, Bob later went out and purchased a dog of the exact breed as Gene's dachshunds. So it was as if he was trying to mirror Gene's life in every detail, even down to the choice of pet. Which is, it's odd. Right now it seems like, when you're on that like first or second date and they're like, yeah, I love watching football. And you're like, so do I. And they're like, what's your favorite team? And you're like, what's your favorite team? And they're just like the 49ers. And then you're just like, yeah, same. And they're like, who's your favorite player? And you're just like, I'm just going to go home and do some research really quick, get a few jerseys. And then, you just get to run down that hole. You barrel down that hill. We've all done it. Maybe not to that degree of like getting a dog in the same breed, but you're just like, oh yeah, that's great. I suggest you don't, because it just leads to bad stuff, as we're about to see. So Gene, of course, didn't realize Bob's "I love that breed" comment was disingenuous. He simply found it nice that Bob shared an interest in dogs. And it was photos like this that he once showed Bob Peterson, trying to be friendly and include his quieter colleague. So over time, Gene and Bob settled into a routine of pleasant workplace interaction. So they'd chat in between directing aircraft, sometimes grabbing a cup of coffee together during breaks. And Gene's affable nature drew Bob out of his shell a little more each day. And in those chats, Bob often flattered Gene or expressed interest in whatever Gene was interested in. Gene would buy a new pickup truck, and Bob would pepper him with questions about the make and the model. In fact, Bob actually went and bought the exact same make and color of the truck that Gene had purchased. Red flag number 2. So Gene shows up pictures of his dog. Bob ends up with the dogs. And at the time, these might have seemed like quirky coincidences or just Bob trying to fit in. And Gene even found some of it flattering because he just thought Bob looked up to him as a role model of sorts, and because Bob lacked close friends of his own.
Quote, Bob was far more chatty with Gene. In fact, he appeared to be in awe of him,
one account would later note. So this dynamic just kind of defined their friendship. And it's important to note that Bob Peterson wasn't viewed as dangerous or creepy by anyone in those early days. He was a little odd, perhaps, but harmless otherwise. Coworkers just saw him as a lonely guy who was lucky to have a friend like Gene looking out for him. And Gene himself had a compassionate soft spot for Bob. Because as extroverted as Gene was, he understood that not everyone fit in so easily. And he likely thought, Bob's a good guy and just shy, and took pride in helping Bob feel included. So the friendship seemed genuine and mutually beneficial. Gene provided camaraderie and Bob provided loyalty. But when Gene left Nebraska for Florida, he thought he was leaving his old life and everyone in it behind. And that's why it caught him by surprise a few months later when Bob Peterson showed up in Florida too. Let's take a little break because I want to tell you about a product that I've been using for the past few months and have been loving, and that is Blissy. Thank you to Blissy for supporting this channel and sponsoring this video. And before you think, oh, it's just another silk pillowcase, there's nothing special about it. Also, I don't know why you're English in this, but you are. This isn't like those cheap satin ones that are made from synthetics and are actually rough on your hair and skin. Blissy's real silk look is dermatologist tested and recommended. And here's what's most important to me. It's clinically proven to not clog pores, unlike cotton. And I have really sensitive skin, so that is very detrimental for me. And the science behind it is actually fascinating, because silk has naturally hydrating fibers that keep your skin moisturized all night. And it's antibacterial, hypoallergenic, and naturally cooling. We all love a cool pillow. So no more waking up with those weird sleep creases on your face or that sweaty, uncomfortable feeling. And plus, it eliminates frizz and preserves hairstyles and protects color-treated hair. And they've also got over 70 colors, including a new Wicked and Harry Potter line. The millennials are screaming right now, and yes, I am one of them. And over 3 million people have bought these, and they were even voted Best Gift of the Year 2024. And I've been using mine for around 3 months now, and honestly, my morning hair situation has gone from Garth from Wayne's World to Amy Dunn from Gone Girl. Say what you want about her, but she's got great hair. Not to mention my skin feels softer, and those little lines around my eyes seem a little less noticeable, which I will take. And plus, all around, I'm just sleeping better because there's just something about a cool pillowcase that is lovely. And because you're a listener, Blissy is offering 60 nights risk-free plus an additional 30% off when you shop at blissy.com/CCCM. That's BLISSY.com/CCCM and use code CCCM to get an additional 30% off. And trust me, your skin and your hair will thank you. Thank you so much to Blissy for supporting this channel and sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the video. So in early 2003, roughly 3 months after Jean's transfer, Bob appeared in the doorway of the St. Pete Clearwater Control Tower office, smiling broadly at Jean. So Bob had managed to secure a transfer to the same facility as Jean, and the timing was uncanny. The dogs in the truck aren't seeming so innocent at this point, because Bob had left Nebraska and followed Jean to the very same corner of Florida. So was this just a really weird coincidence? Well, Bob had an explanation ready, and he claimed he too wanted a fresh start, and Florida sounded appealing. Plus, there were job openings there, and he acted like it was just a fortunate outcome that he and Jean ended up at the same place again. And Jean's feelings were mixed about this, because on one hand, he greeted Bob warmly. He's a nice guy and was probably touched that a friend from Nebraska valued him enough to come to the same workplace, and he likely felt flattered and happy not to lose that friendship. But on the other hand, in the back of his mind, Jean found the situation a bit odd and unsettling, and the thought may have crossed his mind. Was Bob essentially following me? After all, what were the odds that Bob would independently decide to move to Florida mere months after Jean did? However, Jean wasn't the type to jump to negative conclusions about people. And Bob said he wanted a new beginning too, Jean was inclined to believe him. Because again, he had no reason to believe that he was under any sort of threat. It's just Bob. It's just odd Bob, boring Bob. And Bob even framed it as wanting to start over just like Jean had. So Jean brushed aside the slight unease, and he probably thought, poor Bob doesn't have much tying him to Nebraska, so why not Florida? And Bob also had no spouse or children, and his brothers and family were scattered elsewhere, so relocating was very feasible for him as well. So Bob's integration into the Florida team was again low-key. He resumed his quiet, efficient work style as if nothing had changed except the weather. And for Jean, however, the odd coincidence of Bob's migration planted the first seed of concern, because Bob's sudden appearance made him a little uneasy. And Jean couldn't quite put his finger on why, but it felt as if a shadow from his old life had followed him into the new one. But still, Jean chose to see the good. And if Bob was coming all this way with no friends or family around, well, Jean would be a friend to him now. Because why wouldn't he be? But still, this odd timing of Bob's transfer, which no one really questioned, would later be recognized as one of the many red flags that something was amiss. So as the months went by, a series of strange coincidences and patterns began to emerge in Bob Peterson's behavior. Patterns that were noticed, but not fully understood at the time, by Jean and JJ specifically. And one of the earliest odd incidences happened when Jean and JJ were preparing to move into their new dream home. And both Jean and JJ had put their existing houses on the market because each of them owned a home before marrying each other. And to the couple's surprise, Bob expressed interest in buying Jean's old house as soon as he learned it was for sale. Third, fifth, sixth, eighth red flag? And on the surface, it might seem convenient, I guess. I don't even think it looks convenient. I just think it looks creepy at this point. But, you know, it could be a friend wants to buy your place, saving you the hassle of listing it, I guess. So Jean was open to the idea and entertained Bob's offer. But then Bob made a strange request, and he wanted Jean's linens. Specifically, Jean's bed sheets and pillowcases to be included as part of the home purchase. Red flag number 52. I think that adds about 30 red flags. That's weird and creepy, and he's going to do weird shit with your sheets. But how not inconspicuous can you be, you know? So when Jean first heard this, he likely chuckled, thinking Bob was joking, but Bob was dead serious. He wanted those very sheets Jean slept on. But why on earth would Bob need Jean's personal linens? It was an extremely intimate, odd thing to ask for. And I think I know exactly why, but I'm not going to talk about it, and you can use your own brain for that. But the house sale itself did go through, but the linens and pillowcases were not included, and Bob did not hide his disappointment. And perhaps Jean rationalized the linen episode as just Bob's social clumsiness or eccentric taste, I guess. But red flags were literally everywhere. But I guess at the time they were scattered and small enough to ignore or explain away. You know, we can see it because we're reading through the whole story, but scattered out over, you know, years at a time, I get where it's just like, Bob's just like that. So Jean and JJ found Bob's behavior weird, but not overtly threatening. He was just always there, always interested, and always watching. In an era before stalking was a common workplace topic, Jean mostly interpreted Bob's mimicry as awkward hero worship. But JJ felt something was off. But likely, she never imagined the depth of Bob's obsession. And they would soon find out, in the most horrific way, just how dangerously fixated Bob Peterson had become with Jean. So by the fall of 2006, Jean and JJ Thurneau were on the cusp of a perfect life they had fought hard to build. Their new custom home was finally complete, and they moved in amid a flurry of joy and relief. And the house was everything they'd hoped for. Every corner of the home represented a fresh start, and this place was truly their own, untainted by past memories. And as newlyweds, this was a thrilling time for them. And after settling in, Bob repeatedly insisted on visiting them at their home. And his persistence verged on pestering. Quote,
"I have a special housewarming gift for you,"
unquote. Bob would say repeatedly, implying that he couldn't simply hand it over at the office. And this reminds me of the movie The Gift, which now I'm curious if the movie is based off of this event. I need to look into that after. But The Gift, also a very good movie with Jason Bateman. Is that right? This guy. You should watch it. Anyway, but the gift had been given at the house. And Jean wondered privately why Bob was making such a fuss. Why couldn't he just give it to them at work as if it's a normal gift? But Bob was insistent. And Jean wondered privately. But The Gift, also a very good movie with Jason Bateman. Is that right? This guy. You should watch it. Anyway, but the gift had been given at the house. And Jean wondered privately why Bob was making such a fuss. Why couldn't he just give it to them at work as if it's a normal gift? But Bob was insistent that they'd, quote,
understand when they saw it,
unquote, why it needed to be at their home. And Jean and JJ felt a growing sense of obligation because he was a coworker they did see every single day because both of them worked at the same job as Bob. And Bob had gone out of his way for their wedding gift even though they hadn't invited him to the wedding. And the gift was an expensive Swarovski crystal vase. And this gift was unexpected and very lavish, far beyond what most coworkers would give. And Jean and JJ were a bit uncomfortable with it, but also touched by Bob's gesture. In fact, they felt a twinge of guilt for not inviting him when they saw how much trouble and expense Bob had gone into picking out the crystal vase. And Bob's intention, it appeared, was to ensure they did feel guilty after he felt upset for the lack of invitation. And in that, he succeeded. But Jean couldn't shake a mild sense of obligation toward Bob after that, resolving to be even kinder to his lonely colleague. So now, to refuse him a one-time dinner visit might seem rude or ungrateful, though a quiet voice in the back of their minds told them they'd prefer not to let Bob deeper into their personal lives, and they ultimately decided it would do more harm than good to alienate him at this point. Quote,
"What's the worst that could happen?"
Unquote, they likely said to each other with a shrug. It'll just be one awkward dinner, and then we can get on with our lives. So they agreed to invite Bob over for one evening for dinner and to see their new home. This is like the movie The Gift. And I researched it. It says it's not based off of this, and it's based off of like Cape Fear and Fatal Attraction and stuff, but there's like no way that they didn't take stuff from this case, like at all. I need to rewatch that movie now. So obviously Bob was elated when Jean extended the invitation, eagerly locking down the date and time. So the night finally came for Bob's visit, and it would be a night that started innocently enough, but ended in unimaginable horror. So it was November 1st, 2006, a Wednesday, and Jean and JJ planned a simple dinner at home with Bob as their guest. And perhaps they chose a weeknight hoping to keep it low-key and short, like it wouldn't run too late because they had to wake up the next morning to go to work. And they even had plans to go out later that evening, or so they hinted to Bob, to ensure the dinner wouldn't stretch on indefinitely. So the couple braced themselves for an evening with their socially awkward friend. So Bob Peterson arrived earlier than expected that evening. In fact, he showed up on their doorstep before Jean and JJ had finished some last-minute preparations. And it wasn't a huge issue, as his early arrival meant they would be able to get him out of their house at a more reasonable hour, because they didn't want him to stay long, and initially the dinner proceeded normally as any dinner would. But he had no problem indulging in the food. If there was one thing Bob did that night with enthusiasm, it was eat. So as he finished his plate and they thought he could leave soon, he insisted on more food. It was like the only thing that could keep him in the house, so he just kept eating and eating and eating, which I don't know why, but it's like terrifying. Just like you're kind of held captive in your own home by a guest who you can't let leave because they keep eating, and it's like such an awkward situation, but like, what else are you supposed to do? So they obliged Bob's appetite, but each passing minute made it clearer Bob had no intention of leaving anytime soon. And it was getting later than they anticipated, and their hints about having plans later didn't seem to register with Bob. So Jean and JJ exchanged secretive glances, like, how do we get him to leave? But Bob was not budging. And finally, perhaps sensing their impatience, or maybe simply remembering his own agenda, Bob perked up and said,
"I almost forgot about the housewarming gift I have for you."
So he would reach down and pull out a beautifully crafted leather-bound photo album out of his bag. And on the cover, embossed in gold, with the name Thurneau, Jean and JJ were immediately intrigued. And it was a thoughtful and personalized gesture, so they would thank him as they opened the album together. And what they saw in the album made their smiles fade into expressions of shock. Because page after page contained large, glossy photographs of their house under construction. And the very first image was their lot when it was just dirt, before building began. And the next showed early foundation work, then framing, then the roof going up. And as they turned each page, the house in the photos gradually materialized until the final pages showed the fully completed exterior. So they were looking at a chronological photo documentary of their home's entire construction process. And JJ's mouth hung open, and she and Jean shared a bewildered and disturbed look with each other and said,
"You've been at our house watching it being built?"
JJ finally asked, incredulous at the implication, and Bob beamed with an odd sort of pride, saying,
"Every couple of days."
Oh my God! Red flag number 3000. And he would just reply very matter-of-factly, like, yeah, what's wrong with that? You're welcome. Pfft, ungrateful bitch. And he would then add, almost if it excused the horrifying intrusion,
"I photographed everyone's houses from work."
What? Call the police! And he just seemed oblivious to just how creepy the revelation was. And for months, without their knowledge, Bob had been sneaking onto their property to take pictures, tracking every stage of their building of their private sanctuary. And Jean and JJ were just sitting there like stunned, because this went far beyond normal friendship. They now realized Bob's obsession with their life was much more intense than they had thought. And JJ herself felt just violated, which rightfully so. Because those pictures, though beautifully shot, I guess, represented a breach of privacy in a place they thought was their safe haven. So an uncomfortable silence would fill the room. And JJ especially felt the need to get Bob out of their house as soon as possible. But before she could muster a tactful way to usher him out, fate intervened in a small but significant way. Because as the tension mounted in the living room, headlights swept across the window as someone pulled into the driveway. And a moment later, there was a sound of a car door and a knock at the door. And it was JJ's adult daughter arriving to fetch her mother for a quick errand run they had planned earlier. And the daughter was expecting JJ to accompany her to pick up a few items that evening. And JJ obviously saw this as an opportunity. And she immediately told Jean and Bob that she had to go out briefly with her daughter. And perhaps she hoped Bob would take it as a cue to leave as well. But Bob, however, didn't budge. And instead, he remained in his seat. So now, alone with Jean, as JJ left the house, she cast one last glance over her shoulder at her husband and their odd guest, hoping that by the time she returned, Bob would have made his exit. So as JJ stepped out with her daughter, the atmosphere in the Thurneau home was thick with tension. Jean and Bob were now alone in the living room, and the album of clandestine photographs resting on the coffee table like an elephant in the room. And one can imagine Jean was trying to keep the situation as polite as possible, and perhaps he stood up to clear the dinner plates or offered something to drink. Anything to diffuse the utter awkwardness between himself and Bob. But Bob's mind was on something entirely different, because he hadn't just come to hand over the photo album, he had another gift waiting. One far more personal and disturbing than even the albums of stolen moments. So moments after JJ's car pulled away, Bob made his move and said,
"I have another gift for you."
But before Jean could respond, Bob hurried out to his car parked in the driveway, and he returned carrying something in his hand. And as Bob approached, Jean might have felt his stomach nodding. And the bizarre photo album was bad enough, so what on earth could this second gift be? And Bob would come through the door and hand the gift to Jean. And it was a 3-page letter addressed to Jean, which Bob had prepared in advance. And Jean began to read it. And with each sentence, his blood ran colder. Because in this letter, Bob Peterson poured out the secret feelings he had been harboring for years, saying, quote,
"I have loved you for some time now,"
unquote. And he described how he had always, quote unquote, chickened out when trying to tell Jean face to face. So at this moment, while Jean's reading this letter, everything is just clicking into place in the most horrifying way. Bob following him to Florida, buying his house, copying his interests, photographing the new home. It all stemmed from this twisted, unrequited love and obsession. And what exactly transpired in the Thurneau living room immediately after Jean finished reading Bob's shocking letter can only be reconstructed from evidence and later speculation, since there were no witnesses. But the sequence of events would turn deadly within minutes. So JJ would return to what she expected would be a quiet home. But instead, she stepped into a scene of confusion and dread, because Bob's vehicle was no longer there. And she likely assumed Bob had finally taken the hint and just gone home. However, she noticed a trail of blood droplets and smears in the driveway and up the front steps. So puzzled and alarmed, she followed the trail, which led to the front door. And the door itself was closed but unlocked. And JJ's stomach tightened, because Jean never would have left blood on the porch without cleaning it. And where was Bob? So she pushed open the door, calling her husband's name. there was no answer, and the house was unsettlingly quiet. So as she took a few steps inside, the sight that greeted her made her heart skip, because she found more blood smeared on the floor in a long line leading further in. So these looked like drag marks, as if something or someone heavy had been pulled through the foyer. And JJ tried to calm herself with rational thoughts. Maybe Gene had an accident and Bob took him to the hospital. Or perhaps Gene cut himself badly and was dragged out for help. But if so, why was there still so much blood left behind? And just inside the living area, JJ's eyes were drawn to a pile of clothing on the floor, and she recognized them immediately, because it was a man's t-shirt, jeans, and underwear. And they were Gene's clothes, and they were soaked in blood, crumpled in a heap as if discarded hastily. So now, panic was rising in her chest, and this just made no sense. And Gene was nowhere to be seen, and neither was Bob. So her mind must have raced with every single terrifying possibility. And just fighting the urge to break down, JJ moved further into the living room, and her dream home had become a blood-spattered mystery. The Christmas tree they had happily put up that afternoon and now stood over a ghastly scene. And she picked up her phone to try and call Gene, only to hear something from within the room. And that was Gene's cell phone. And it was ringing faintly from within his pocket of his discarded jeans. So seeing Gene's phone abandoned amidst his bloody clothes, it's just sent a jolt of reality through JJ, because something violent had occurred here, and at the moment, any hope that this was a trivial accident just completely evaporated. And she realized with horror that Gene and Bob were both missing under deeply suspicious circumstances, because the blood indicated that someone was seriously hurt. So JJ would cautiously continue to look around, calling out for Gene in hopes he might somehow be there and in need of aid. But still, she was met with silence and no answer, and the house was empty, and something told JJ that Bob was not helping Gene. Bob was the danger. And her intuition flashed back to Bob's bizarre behavior with the photo album earlier that evening, and a chill ran through her spine. And in a matter of minutes, the person she had considered a harmless, if awkward colleague had become the prime suspect in her husband's disappearance. So as JJ moved through the living room, she stumbled upon a spent bullet casing on the floor near the couch, and the small metal shell glinted in the light. And it was a .22 caliber casing, as experts would later determine. Which means a gun was fired in the home. So her reality was undeniable now. She was standing in a crime scene, and all signs pointed to an attack right here in their home. So trying to keep her composure, JJ immediately dialed 911, and Pasco County Sheriff's deputies were dispatched at once. And overwhelmed, JJ could only imagine the worst. Gene had likely been shot and forcibly taken by Bob, and it was a thought almost too terrible to process. But all evidence was aligning with it. And JJ's eyes would land on one more thing that she hadn't noticed in her initial sweep. And she realized this must be what started the violence. And it was the 3-page letter Bob had given Gene. And her hands would tremble as she picked it up and began to read Bob's words for herself. And nothing could have prepared JJ for the vile content of Bob Peterson's letter. And as she read Bob's written confession, her revulsion grew with every word. Because here was Bob, a man she mostly knew as a quiet coworker who sometimes made her uneasy, laying bare an obsession she never dreamed he had. And Bob wrote that he felt he had been living a lie all these years by hiding his feelings for Gene. And he mused about his sexuality, admitting uncertainty about being gay, but certainty about being in love with Gene. And the letter described in disturbingly explicit terms Bob's longing for Gene, something that made JJ's skin crawl. But detailed fantasies and desires, including the jaw-dropping admission that he envied JJ because, quote,
she gets to touch and see Gene's naked body every day,
unquote. JJ likely felt disgust and anger at the line Bob was jealous of not only Gene's affection, but physical intimacy that was meant to be private. And then came the most horrifying part, Bob's threatening ultimatum. And he wrote, and likely spoke to Gene, that, quote,
he would not leave the house until they had
relations with each other. adult things with each other. And Bob explicitly propositioned Jean for stuff that you do with your mouth downstairs. I guess I could say that. Saying, quote unquote,
"I'm not leaving until I taste your in my."
And this is a line that JJ would never forget. And her heart broke and her stomach turned as she pictured how Jean must have reacted and the shock and betrayal he would have felt reading this from someone he considered a friend. And Bob's tone in the letter went back and forth between pleading confession and menacing demand. And it even included a twisted facade of religious remorse, saying, quote unquote, "I have already asked for God's forgiveness," as if that absolved what he was about to do, which it didn't. It's evil. So clutching this letter, JJ burst into tears. And by the time deputies arrived and gently took it from her hands as evidence, she had seen enough to assemble the grim scenario in her mind. Bob had come out to Jean, been rejected, and snapped. And she could only imagine Jean's revulsion and anger at Bob's proposition and how that encounter turned violent, saying, quote, "I'm sure Bob's feelings were extremely hurt. Jean would not hold back on how he felt about that," unquote. JJ would later reflect, recognizing that her husband would have been upfront in rejecting Bob's advances. And it was an unimaginable situation because her kind, loving husband was confronted by a deluded friend's ultimatum. And JJ thought of Jean's likely last moments and how horrified and in danger he must have felt and how she wasn't there to help. So this tormenting thought would haunt her forever. And as police took stock of the scene, they too read Bob's letter and immediately understood the significance. Because here was essentially a written confession and motive left behind by the likely perpetrator. And it just shed light on why Bob Peterson might have harmed Jean, an all-assuming, unreciprocated love that tipped over into violence when rebuffed. And Pasco County Sheriff's spokesman, Kevin Dahl, later summarized the predicament saying, quote, "It's hard to tell what happened there after he gave him the note. We just know what the aftermath was," unquote. And the note provided context, but not the exact sequence of crime. And officers assured JJ that they would do everything possible to find Jean and Bob. And an alert went out to patrol units to be on the lookout for Bob Peterson's vehicle and both men, who were officially listed as missing persons. And one possibly a victim of abduction, obviously, and the other a dangerous suspect. So for JJ, those next hours were complete agony. And her home, which earlier that day rang with laughter and domestic happiness, was now cordoned off with crime scene tape stained with her husband's blood. And she could barely process the surreal horror. Bob Peterson, of all people, had kidnapped her husband at gunpoint after attempting to force a sexual encounter. So the plot twist of reality felt like something out of a nightmare or crime thriller. And in the chaos of emotion, one thought gave JJ a glimmer of desperate hope. Jean might still be alive. And if Bob took him, maybe he only wounded him and was holding him somewhere. That was the only thing she could really hold on to at that point. And maybe Jean could still be rescued if they found Bob in time. So clinging to that possibility, she prayed silently, even as she answered investigators' questions through sobs. So the stage was now set for a frantic 2-day search, as authorities raced against the clock to locate Bob Peterson and unravel the deadly drama that began with a love letter. So the Pasco County Sheriff's Office launched into action on the night of November 1st, 2006. And given the bloody scene and Bob Peterson's ominous letter, the stakes were clear. Jean's life was in imminent danger if he was still alive, and Bob Peterson was armed and unstable and extremely dangerous. So police units scoured the immediate area around the Thurneau home for any signs of Bob's vehicle or the direction he might have gone. And inside the house, crime scene investigators collected the evidence, which was blood samples, Jean's discarded clothes, the shell casings, and Bob's letter. But obviously no signs of forced entry were found on the doors or windows, which made sense because Bob was an invited guest. And the implication was that Bob had likely pulled the gun on Jean while still inside, controlling him without needing a break-in. So as the night wore on into the early morning hours of November 2nd, no word came from either man, and Bob had not called anyone, as far as police could tell looking into his cell phone records. to claim responsibility or to make any sort of demands. Nor had Jean managed to reach out for help either. So the silence only deepened the dread, and police began checking Bob Peterson's known addresses and contacts. And they learned quickly that Bob's listed address was Ellenton, Florida, a town about 30 miles south. So officers would go to Bob's Ellenton house, and they found no one home and no immediate signs of foul play there. It just appeared dark and undisturbed, as if Bob hadn't even been there recently. So this was a dead end, at least for the moment. And as the search stretched into its second day, the situation became more dire. And the Tampa Bay Times ran an initial piece titled, "Two Men Vanish, Leaving Blood Behind," detailing how Jean Thurneau and Robert Peterson were both missing, and that pool of blood and a mysterious note were found at the scene. And JJ, just distraught, likely huddled with family and clergy, because she was known to be a woman of faith and turned to her church for support during this time, just every hour that passed with Jean still missing was torture. And she was haunted by thoughts of what might be happening to him. I can't even imagine the dread she had in her at every moment. And investigators, meanwhile, dug into Bob Peterson's background for clues. And they interviewed colleagues from the St. Pete Clearwater Tower, and that's when more pieces of the puzzle came to light. Because coworkers began mentioning how Bob had transferred shortly after Jean, and how he'd always seemed fixated on Jean at work. And suddenly, the full scope of Bob's obsession became clear to law enforcement. This was not a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion, but the climax of a long, simmering fixation. And they realized Bob had effectively been stalking Jean for years, first in Nebraska and now in Florida, and all while keeping his love secret until this tragic end. So armed with this understanding, police theorized that Bob might have prepared a remote location in advance as part of his final plan, because he'd been extensively planning for years at this point, so why wouldn't he have like an endgame plan? And a big break would come late on November 2nd or early November 3rd when detectives searching Bob's financial records and belongings uncovered a rental agreement for a property in Safety Harbor, Florida. And the lease seemed recent, and Bob had not mentioned renting a place to anyone. So this hidden residence immediately became the prime lead. And it fit the narrative of premeditation. Bob possibly rented a secluded place to take Jean where he wouldn't be interrupted, which is horrifying. So armed with this new lead, officers rushed to Safety Harbor. And by now, it was November 3rd, 2006, 2 days since Jean had disappeared, and the dread was at its peak. And JJ just waited by the phone, fearing the worst but praying for some sort of miracle. And investigators would approach the Safety Harbor rental house, unsure of what they would find. Would Bob be there with Jean tied up? Would there be a standoff? They had to prepare for anything. So on that morning of November 3rd, law enforcement converged on the address of Bob Peterson's rented house. And the neighborhood likely had no idea what was unfolding as police quietly surrounded the entire location. And after knocking and getting no response, they made the decision to force entry into the home, concerned that lives could be in jeopardy inside. So they breached the door and swept in tactically. And almost immediately, officers were met with a scene of utter horror in the master bedroom. Because there, lying on the floor of the bedroom, they found the lifeless body of Jean Thurneau. And the sight was absolutely gruesome. Because Jean, like he had left his home, was unclothed, and it was immediately evident that he had suffered severe violence. And most shockingly and gruesomely, his had been removed in a very brutal way. And it was assumed that a razor blade or other sharp instrument was used. And I think it just shows the frustration that Bob had for probably being angry that Jean did not want to do what Bob wanted to do. So that was the retort, was mutilating Jean in his most intimate area. And Jean had also been shot in the head with a .22 caliber bullet, and blood had pooled and dried on the floor around him. And not far from Jean's body, on the bed, lay the corpse of Bob Peterson. And Bob was dressed only in a t-shirt and underwear, and a single gunshot visible on his head. And for investigators, the discovery answered the most pressing question, which was, where were Jean and Bob? But it brought a heavy finality. And both men were, meaning there would be no rescue, no negotiation, and no trial, and the case had reached its tragic conclusion just immediately. And when news of the discovery was relayed to JJ, it absolutely shattered her, and 2 days of holding on to hope collapsed into grief. And authorities likely delivered the news with solemn regret, with the way Jean's body had been found and that he was gone. And the brutality of what Bob did was a detail they might have initially shielded from her due to its extreme nature. But eventually, however, such facts became public as the case was discussed in media and in investigation discovery shows as well. But JJ herself said she spared some family members those details because they were too horrific to speak of. And the grim discovery made headlines, and local newspapers described how the 2-day mystery ended in tragedy. And reporters recounted how Jean's body was found beside Bob's, and that evidence indicated Bob shot Jean and then himself. And it was a story almost too shocking to believe. Just a tale of obsession, betrayal, and death that left the community absolutely reeling. And many who knew Bob casually were stunned that boring Bob was capable of such barbarity. And those close to Jean were just absolutely devastated that his hard-earned happy ending had been so violently snatched away. And the tragedy was now fully exposed, and all that remained was to understand how and why it happened, and for those left behind, especially JJ, to somehow pick up the pieces. So with the bodies recovered and evidence in hand, investigators formally concluded what the evidence had pointed to all along. This was a murder suicide orchestrated by Robert Dean Peterson. And the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, in their statements, explained that all signs showed Bob had shot and killed Jean at the Thurneau home on November 1st, then transported Jean's body to the Safety Harbor house where Bob later died using the same firearm. But there was zero indication of any other persons being involved, and no forced entry, no unknown DNA, nothing to suggest a third-party assailant. And the .22 caliber handgun found by Bob's body was confirmed to be the weapon that fired the fatal bullets into Jean and Bob. And the mutilation of Jean's body, while not directly part of the cause of death, underscored the intensely personal and deranged nature of the entire crime. And the formal ruling meant that there would be no criminal trial and that the only suspect was deceased, effectively closing the case. So for law enforcement, it was both a relief to have resolved the immediate danger and obvious frustration because Bob could never be interrogated or brought to justice in court. And the detective work pivoted to unraveling the backstory and motives before the record and to provide answers to Jean's family. And the tale that emerged is the one that you heard today, and it's just absolutely devastating and horrifying. And in the aftermath, as reporters and detectives dug deeper, a portrait of Bob Peterson's secret life emerged. And Bob's family, when contacted, shared revelations that even Jean's closest circle hadn't known. And Anthony Peterson, Bob's brother, spoke publicly, disclosing that Bob was gay and didn't really hide that fact within the family. And this was eye-opening, because Bob had never come out at work, but apparently his brother knew he was attracted to men. And Anthony also shared something very eerie, and that's that Bob often talked about Jean in conversations over the years. And Bob spoke of Jean so frequently that his brother knew the name, yet Bob never indicated that they had any relationship beyond friendship. So to Anthony, Bob's fixation on Jean was notable, but he had no idea it was dangerously obsessive. And after the fact, Anthony expressed shock at his brother's actions, saying, quote, "I didn't even think he had a gun. I didn't think he was capable of doing it. He might have snapped," unquote. So it seemed even Bob's own family hadn't grasped the depth of his obsession or the instability brewing within him. And Bob had no close friends outside of Jean, and even that friendship was very one-sided and based on Bob's infatuation. So investigators found that Bob had been essentially stalking Jean for years. And interviews with JJ in the aftermath highlighted how, in retrospect, so many warning signs were there. And she recounted to the Tampa Bay Times, enumerating Bob's bizarre behaviors. He followed Jean to Florida after a job transfer, bought the furnished home he owned, requested to have the sheets stay, gave him a secret photo collection of a home that he'd clearly been stalking that was their own. And each of these things alone seemed odd, But together, they formed a clear picture of stalking, and JJ admitted that she had no idea about Bob's stalking until it was too late. And she did find Bob's behavior around Jean to be odd and told police so, but she never suspected the depth of his love or capacity for violence, saying, quote, "He never indicated that they had a relationship," unquote, and that would be Bob's brother. And that's true. Bob never openly tried anything until the very end. It was just all in his head, a fantasy he nurtured alone. And the investigation also debunked any early thought that maybe Jean had provoked Bob or had an affair or anything salacious, but absolutely nothing of the sort was true. Jean had never encouraged Bob's affections, and he likely never even knew about them until that very night. And this case forced some people to think about boundaries and warning signs in their own lives. And it became a cautionary tale about how obsession can hide in plain sight. And for law enforcement, there wasn't much more to do on the case legally, but they often reach out to victims' families in these scenarios to answer any lingering questions and make sure they understand the findings. And JJ, one can imagine, wanted to know every single detail, not out of a morbid curiosity, but just to piece together the how and why so she could find some sort of closure. But at the end of the day, she lost her beloved husband, the man who had given her a second chance at love, in the most violent way possible, and to someone they both had known and trusted. JJ's immediate response was not one of hatred or vengeance. Rather, she leaned on her deep well of faith and compassion to get through the ordeal. And in interviews, an astonishing statement from her revealed the grace with which she tried to cope, saying, quote, "I don't hate Bob. How can you hate someone who is mentally disturbed?" Unquote. And that was an extremely powerful sentiment, because after all the atrocities that Bob had done to the love of her life, JJ chose to view him through a lens of pity rather than pure anger, attributing his actions to severe psychological problem, which he clearly had. And ultimately, Jean Thurneau's story is remembered as a heartbreaking case of deadly obsession. But Jean's legacy, however, lives on in the memories of loved ones and in the cautionary tale his story has become. So through retellings like these, we honor Jean by learning from what happened to him. And we honor JJ's courage and compassion. And we face the dark truth that sometimes the real danger isn't a stranger at all, but a harmless friend whose love has turned into a lethal obsession. But my heart goes out to JJ and her family and to Jean's entire family. And with that, that is the case. If you would like me to dive into any other true crime cases, let me know down below. I always read the comments. And until then, stay safe, and I will see your beautiful face in the next video, okay?